Just want to thank everyone for joining today. I'm so delighted to be part of this production and to be joined with a number of special guests today. First, I'd like to introduce Grace. Grace McNally is a Brooklyn-based, Boston-bred documentary filmmaker who has contributed to content that has appeared on National Geographic, PBS, Discovery Channel, History Channel, Comedy Central, HBO, and Netflix, and theatrical release. She is the co-producer of Slay the Dragon, a feature documentary on democratic values and voting rights in the United States, produced by ARC Media in collaboration with Participant Media. We're also joined by Chris Lamar. Chris works primarily on creating, protecting, and implementing independent redistricting commissions. He's drafted them for numerous states, as well as advocated for independent redistricting commissions in state legislatures across the country. His portfolio includes advancing ranked choice voting as a method of election to help reduce political polarization and increase minority representation across the country. And finally, we have Pedro from FairVote. Pedro brings both experience and passion to electoral reform and community advocacy. He worked as an associate at the law office of Robert Rubin, where he specialized in claims under the California Voting Rights Act, and has served as editor-in-chief of the Hastings Race and Poverty Law Journal and as political chair of UC Hastings La Raza Law Students Association. Okay, with that, let's start with Grace. Grace, why make a documentary about Eastpointe? And more specifically, talk about taking a complicated process-oriented democracy reform and making it accessible to those who don't think about voting rights on a regular basis. More equitable democracy struggles with this on a constant basis. So talk to us about how you approach storytelling within this context.
Yeah, I mean, why make a film about Eastpointe? Well, first of all, it was a historic election. This was the first time that this voting method had been used in this city, and in response to a DOJ lawsuit of this kind, which was a huge change in precedent and very worth documenting. And then it was just more broadly an opportunity to, as you said, expose a different kind of audience to this conversation, to democratic change conversation. So to that end, I've really tried to focus on the characters of Eastpointe as much as possible, the wonderful people working there to make change, as Mary put it.
Awesome, thanks. For Chris, you made several appearances in this movie. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and your organization's role in Eastpointe and Voting Rights Act work in general?
Yeah, sure. So the Campaign Legal Center, we litigate a lot under the Voting Rights Act. We litigated cases. I personally have litigated cases in Virginia Beach and other jurisdictions. The things that happened in Eastpointe are really important to us because, as you sort of mentioned in my bio, we really care about ranked choice voting and advocating for the use of ranked choice voting as a method of elections across the country. And so seeing the Department of Justice agreeing to a consent decree that would use ranked choice voting in city council elections is really important to us. And so for me personally, I was there more in an advisory role, really an observing role to see how the city was able to handle the elections and those kinds of things.
So big picture, how relevant is this Eastpointe case? You alluded to it in the film with regards to the Voting Rights Act lawsuit and the kind of precedent it set in terms of using something other than winner-take-all elections as a remedy.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, whenever you sort of bring up an alternative method of election, such as ranked choice voting, the first question you always get is, well, where else does this happen, or who else is advocating for this? And so being able to go to other places and say, you know, the Department of Justice has agreed to use ranked choice voting as a method of elections, and talking about even other jurisdictions like Maine to a certain degree, or San Francisco and Minneapolis and all these other places that are using it, is really important and is advantageous for us, because everyone always, like, no one really wants to feel like they're the first person to do ranked choice voting or to adopt proportional representation. And so being able to talk about Eastpointe and being able to even mention this documentary, for example, is really helpful for us.
Awesome, thank you. For Pedro, you were not actually featured in the film, but you are very much involved with the voter education in this implementation of ranked choice voting in Eastpointe. Can you tell us a little bit about those efforts and what kinds of challenges you faced?
Yeah, well, one was well, I guess zooming out, I would say that I'm based in San Francisco and we have ranked choice voting here, and we have a relationship with the Department of Education in San Francisco. And we have learned a lot about what the best practices are around educating voters around the ranked ballot and ranked choice voting generally. We worked with the city and along with Grace Ramsey, who not on the film as well, but she was a big part of the education effort. We drafted an education plan together, one with the objectives to provide detailed information that the city is going to adopt a new voting system and to equip voters with knowledge of the ranked choice voting ballot with a focus on the stacked ballot and the way the ballot was actually formatted. Because we see that showing an image of the actual ballot is the best way to educate voters. But yeah, that was kind of the main goal, and I think we accomplished it. The biggest constraint that we had was time, because I think we only had like 2 months to really roll out the education plan. So it was kind of felt like a sprint, but there was really capable staff at the city clerk's office, and we worked with them to make sure that all of the materials and all of, there was education, ranked choice voting education flyers that were put in people's water bills, along with newspaper ads and handouts that were mailed to people's homes as well to educate them about the change in the system. But making all the things, getting it out the door in the constraint of time, I think that was the only thing. But it could what it shows us is that you can do ranked choice voting education in short amount of time as well. And the education plan that was drafted is something that we're kind of using as a model and sharing with others, and if they are looking to bring ranked choice voting to their jurisdiction.
So there's been a few questions about just the nitty-gritty and the specifics of how city council members were elected before and after. So Pedro, can you just give a quick synopsis in terms of what was this the method of election before, and can just be specific about how ranked choice voting and proportional representation worked as the remedy?
Yeah, okay, so before this election change, the city council, there are 4 city council members and a mayor, and a directly elected mayor. And they were, the city council and the mayors, they're elected in odd years, so it's not synced with the presidential cycle, unless there's a special election like the one that just happened actually. And they're elected at large or citywide in staggered terms. So 2 candidates will be up for an election citywide. And then, in 2 years, you'll have another election for the other 2 seats. And what was different, but essentially voters are allowed to vote for 2 candidates, and, you vote, and if a large base of the largest block of voters votes for the same 2 candidates, they could essentially control the outcome of both of those seats. The way ranked choice voting works in proportional representation is that everyone has 1 vote, but they can rank their vote in order of preference. So a majority can still have a majority, but they can't win all the seats. I believe as Justin Levitt described in the film as well. So that was the big change, changing from a winner-take-all system where voters have 2 votes, where essentially the largest block can control the outcome of both seats, to a system where everyone has 1 vote that they can rank. And, depending on how many seats you're filling, changes the amount of votes necessary to win. So when you're electing 2, when you're filling 2 seats, you need a third plus 1 of votes to win. This number of votes to win goes down as the number of seats go up for an election. There's another jurisdiction that just passed ranked choice voting in California. They're going to be able to see 3 seats about once, and the threshold to elect when you're electing 3 is 25% plus 1. I hope that clarifies it for folks.
Yes, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room. So in the end, 2 white candidates won under this system. So the obvious question is, did this system of ranked choice voting proportional representation even work the way it was intended to empower the Black community? Why should we look at proportional representation as a voting rights remedy given the results of this particular election? Chris or Pedro?
Yeah, well, so we studied this, right? And one of the things that I think Chris talked about in the film and others, when you're looking at addressing voting rights issues, you're looking at I think people can vote based on identity if they would like, and that's important to a lot of folks. But also that's only half the story. We also need to look at what voters preferred candidate, who the voters wanted as their preferred candidate, the candidate choice, right? So we're looking at the choices of the voters of the protected group. We kind of ran an analysis with the information that we had and whatever demographic information we had to kind of put together, and we also had an exit poll with some results. And what we found is that Sarah Lucido was the preferred candidate of 31%, or about 30% of African American voters. Mary Hall Rayford was the candidate of choice for about 46% of African American voters. So there was a split, and but what was interesting, I think, is that under the old system, it could have been the case that whoever wins didn't necessarily need a campaign to the African American vote. Essentially, they could have ignored that part of Eastpointe. But under this system, it actually forces candidates to try to get those votes from as many people as they can, forcing candidates to actually appeal to those voters so that they become the choice of those voters. If Sarah Lucido was a popular incumbent, and Harvey Curley was also someone with a lot of name recognition. And I think there's some general understanding that this particular case was a special case in certain ways. And Chris, you and I, we've had conversations about this. So you should talk more about that. But what we know is that African-American voters also supported Sarah Lucido. And in fact, if you look at the second choice votes of African-American voters who supported Sarah Lucido, there was a good amount of them who also supported Mary Hall Rayford, and of the second choices of Mary Hall Rayford, many of them supported Sarah Lucido as well. So, did it make a difference? I think it did. I certainly think that it's the case that these candidates were probably more aggressive in trying to make sure that they were talking to African American voters to become their candidates of choice.
Chris, what's your take on the outcomes?
I think Pedro kind of hit it on the head as far as what I think, but I also think the other thing to remember is that we're talking about one election, right? It's not to determine whether or not the use of proportional representation, the success or failure, I don't think should be based on literally just one election, particularly where, depending on if you believe the allegations that the Department of Justice was alleging in their complaint and in their filings in court, where you're talking about like this long history of diluting the votes of African Americans in city council elections. I don't think you can sort of, beat back all of those allegations of vote dilution just in one election. So I think that's the other thing to remember as well. If I remember right, the voter turnout in the election that Grace filmed so eloquently was about 4,000, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 residents of Eastpointe came out to vote during that election. And as compared to the 2020 election, I believe the numbers were closer to 15,000. So I think there's, to a certain degree, there's a conversation to be had about voter turnout during city council elections in Eastpointe as well.
So one interesting aspect about this election is that only the top two were elected. And Pedro, you alluded to this regarding the structure of elections, that there's still staggered elections, that two are elected each election every 2 years, and then the top two win. I would say most advocates of proportional representation, more winners per election is generally better. And so the number two is a little strange. In Eastpointe, there are 4 city council members with staggered terms. What are the pros and cons of electing all 4 city council members at the same time once every 4 years instead of doing the staggered election every 2 years. Pedro, do you want to take that? And you're muted.
There I am. Hi. Yeah, so like I said, you look at Cambridge and they elect a city council of 9 where you need 1/10 of the vote to get elected. The number of votes that it takes, that number, the number of votes necessary to win, can be more accessible for growing communities and communities of color. And that's kind of what you're looking at when you're looking at these remedies too, right? So for Eastpointe, where it's 45% African American at the time, that's the ACS data that was used in some of those filings. The threshold to win, being 1/3 plus 1, it looks like it's accessible, right? But if you were to put 3 seats up at once, that number would be 25% plus 1, or 4 seats would be 20% plus 1. And why is it that number? It's because it's mathematically impossible for a fifth person to have 20% plus 1 of the vote. That's what makes it fair. It's that number of votes necessary to win. Certainly, unstaggering would make a difference because it would make that number of votes required to win lower. It's something that's been part of different VRA lawsuits in cumulative voting cases and limited voting cases, but that wasn't the remedy that was chosen for Eastpointe at that time. It's certainly something that it's worth looking at, or it's worth observing over time what happens with this remedy. Like Chris said, it's sometimes these remedies take time to stick, to kind of let the changes set. The same is very often said about district-based elections as well, is that sometimes the remedy needs time to stick, and you have to see what happens for the conditions to actually change and for people to get used to those changes. So I'm curious to observe what happens at the next election, and I'm not sure where the city and the DOJ are on those other conversations. I'm not privy to those exchanges.
One last question for Grace, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience. So Grace, watching this documentary gives the audience a sense that something historic was unfolding in Eastpointe. What were the feelings on the ground? Were people apathetic? Were they angry? Were they hopeful? What was it like from you to watch those conversations from your perspective?
I think there were a lot of different feelings, but I think the primary feeling was interest. Everyone wanted to see what was going to happen. Democracy is not a guarantee. We have to work at it. And Eastpointe decided to make an effort, make a change to work at their democracy. And everyone was really excited to come to this moment and see what would happen with the changes that they decided to make. So it was exciting to be on the ground. And I think if there was, if I could do it all over again, the only thing I would want to do is get there sooner and see more of that.
Great. All right, I think we have time for maybe 2 questions or so. Carlos, do you have any that are that you'd like to pose?
Yeah, we have a question from Amanda Gonzalez, and she has a comment saying that she loved the film, loved the way it was framed. She gives her thanks to Grace, and she says, in a number of states and communities where people of color have been systematically disenfranchised, we're seeing that one of the preferred ways of continuing to disenfranchise voters is to mess with the way votes are counted, which makes post-election audits really important. I don't know if we'll be able to answer this question, but she asks, could you talk a little bit about election security and the way communities can ensure that their RCV votes are accurately counted? And Chris, that might actually be more in your wheelhouse since you were
I'm laughing because I see Chris Hughes is in the participant chat room. And Chris Hughes actually was one of the people who was involved in ensuring the accuracy of the Eastpointe election. And so, to answer the question, really, like, you can get right in contact with Chris Hughes and he'll be able to walk you through step by step all of the things that Eastpointe did to ensure that the way that the city did the ranked choice voting, one, it was their first time, and 2, making sure that they did it correctly and accurately. And I remember being in the city hall that day, and they had 2 different rooms set up, where one room was counting the election results and another room was counting the election results. And they wanted to make sure that they came down to the exact same results, even though they weren't actually talking to each other. And so, you know, I know you don't know me from anyone, but like you can, if you want to learn all the really nitty gritty details, I highly suggest contacting Chris Hughes about it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me see. Any more questions coming in?
I don't know if any of us have any answers to this, but there is a question regarding the future of maybe some other changes to ranked choice voting in the city and how people reacted to it. But there's been another election under ranked choice voting, I believe. And so, Pedro, would you like to comment in terms of happening since this documentary?
Sure. There was so as part of the settlement, and this is a settlement agreement the city entered with the DOJ, that it would use ranked choice voting for the city council seats and not the mayor, right? But there was a vacancy to be filled once Minnie Goins was elected to be the mayor. So that seat needed to be filled in a special election, and they used ranked choice voting for single seat for that particular race. And that just happened very recently. There's a blog post about it on the FairVote blog if folks want to read it. Yeah, but there didn't seem to be many issues around it. But you know, I'd be curious to know like what the takes on the ground were as well. we have access to we have the information that the public has around that election. So
right. And I think per Chris's comment, you know, this is the first/second time of implementing something different to replace something that has been in place for quite some time. So it still is very new, and there's a lot of voter education and engagement that still needs to happen here in Eastpointe and in other places. I know that we are quickly wrapping up and running out of time, so I'm just going to kick it back over to Carlos to wrap us up.
Grace, well, thank you so much, George. Appreciate that. Grace, you've done a tremendous job as a filmmaker, and we appreciate your efforts to really humanize electoral reform. Pedro and Chris, we appreciate your insight into aspects of the Eastpointe elections and the challenges and Voting Rights Act lawsuits and the remedies. And George, thank you for shepherding the conversation with such thoughtful questions. The world is definitely a better place because of people like y'all doing really great work. And to the audience, I'd like to recognize your commitment to creating a stronger democracy. You've spent an hour with us learning about electoral systems and Eastpointe, and this work isn't easy, but your efforts to create a more perfect union will benefit generations of people now and in the future. And for that, I salute you. You will receive additional information and resources to get more involved in your own communities in the coming days. And your engagement really can change the world. And if we didn't get to your questions today, we will do our best to answer them in another way. And until we meet again, this is More Equitable Democracy signing off.
Oh, one quick question.
Much.
One quick question. Grace, can you tell us where we can view this film at some later point if audience members want to watch it again?
Yeah, no, it'll be streaming live very soon, and we'll share that with all the audience members.
Awesome, thank you.
Great, thanks. Take care, everybody.